This is episode 88 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. This and every week, we'll be talking to you about public policy issues facing New Mexico. Wally, this week, the most interesting political issue facing New Mexicans that's got a lot of people up in arms, quite frankly, on both sides of the political aisle, is the deal with Facebook. And I posted a blog over at airsofenchantment.com saying, so what's the deal with Facebook? And of course, the deal with Facebook and the issue revolves around the massive facility, the data center that they placed in Valencia County, New Mexico. This whole thing started back in 2016, at least publicly, with regard to this facility going in Valencia County. We at the time, Rio Grande Foundation, had some concerns both with the level of incentives and tax benefits and outright subsidies that were being shoveled Facebook's way. But we also brought up some concerns about the electricity grid. And Wally, this issue just keeps coming up here in New Mexico, the electric grid.
Yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving. And I have a feeling with the Energy Transition Act, that will be the case for years to come. This is a very interesting one because commitments were made, Facebook was brought in, and they wanted this quote-unquote 100% renewable energy, which means nothing, by the way, because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, and we don't have batteries, so so will there be enough renewables generated to run their plant? Yes, but not to run their plant when it needs to be run. So that's even a misnomer. Yeah, and then now to come to find out, maybe the Public Regulatory Commission was not necessarily on board with at least what was presented in the press and publicly, 5-0, that based on testimony in a rate case, that line just benefits Facebook, not the larger grid. So just Facebook would have to pay. That's the general rule in rate making, and it's got people stirred up on all sides of the issue. And some of the issues are commitment to business coming in, but who really should and who needs to pay for these things? Because it looks like electric utilities are getting ready to be the implementers of social policy experimentation increasingly. And I think we're going to see a lot more things like this come. But this one is one that makes you ponder.
Well, I would point folks first and foremost back to episode 85 of Tipping Point, New Mexico, when we interviewed Mike Nasi Nazi, I believe is how he pronounces his name, Life Powered Initiative. He had the back and forth with Senator Martin Heinrich. And why that is interesting is because Senator Heinrich, in his piece in the Albuquerque Journal, claimed that Facebook is 100% renewable, which, as you alluded to there, Wally, Facebook is taking power off the grid, and they are paying to generate wind and solar to be pumped onto the grid. Of course, wind and solar being very unreliable, whereas Facebook is benefiting from traditional sources of electricity generation, whether it's nuclear, coal, natural gas, or whatever it may be. And that's one of the challenges that we saw at the time when we wrote our original post on Facebook and raised our original questions. And we basically said, this is an interesting deal. We hope it works out for New Mexico, but we're not excited about some of the aspects that are being discussed here and put forth for Facebook in terms of the incentives and whatnot. And so recently in the Albuquerque Journal, front page above the fold, this was the biggest story of the day. And certainly economically, now that we're past the session and all, this is a very, very big deal for the state of New Mexico. Additional electricity transmission infrastructure for the grid is being required. The question is, who is requiring it, or who is the demand being made by? And that's what the PRC being 4-1 Democrat controlled. So there is a Republican voice. So if a Republican on the PRC said, hey guys, this is a bunch of anti-business Democrat talking points, they could have stepped up and said, no, I disagree with you. But 5-0, the PRC agreed that this additional spending on the electricity grid was going to benefit primarily Facebook. And so I believe it's $39 million out of $85 million that are required for this new transmission line. PNM is saying that Facebook is the prime beneficiary. And that's where we get this requirement of $39 million from Facebook. It's where we get accusations that this makes New Mexico business unfriendly, that it's going to make it impossible to bring businesses here. And, I think from the Rio Grande Foundation's perspective, this issue is not over. We want to find out what the actual truth is in terms of who is this infrastructure benefiting. Is it the ratepayers at large that could be asked to pay for it if Facebook is not, or is it Facebook itself? And if Facebook is the prime beneficiary, then I believe they should pay for it. If it's really the ratepayers, then the ratepayers should likely pay a larger proportion of that cost. But Wally, you've been involved with PNM and other entities around the state. You know a lot about electricity policy. What do you think happened here?
Well, and the real answer is I don't know. But one of the issues this has to do with is I'm not sure how much of that transmission line was so that they could say they were using green energy as opposed to just to provide capacity for this data center, which is going to be a huge electricity user. The other thing you need to look at is that when you build a transmission line, sometimes there's the short term and then the longer term where if you build a line and you hook up the first customer, there's generally ways in rates to where that customer wouldn't have to pay for all of it if there's the ability to grow load in the future. The third thing that happens sometimes is that if it is specifically for a customer, they pay for it, but then if other people then later hook onto that, they'll get a credit back for that. And so the reporting I've read, and I certainly apologize for not digging into the details of that case, but I'm not sure of what that is. But the bottom line is that this is a definite curveball in what everyone was led to believe with regard to this project. And we'll see. This is an interesting one. This one's going to be fun to watch. And I really would like the rest of the story to come out.
Well, Wally, partially because I've been hearing from so many, conservatives, people who I respect, who are up in arms and concerned about this being a anti-business situation here. Gary Tonjes, the Albuquerque Economic Development, Alicia Keys, the state, now she's with the Lujan Grisham administration, but I reached out to legislators in Valencia County. I also talked specifically to former state senator, now PRC Commissioner Steve Fishman, and went ahead and tuned in. You can actually go to the PRC's website and find the footage of the event. It was April the 16th, and it's the first half hour or so of this commission hearing, and you can listen to the various presentations. And a half hour at a public hearing like this, is anyone who's been to a legislative committee hearing in Santa Fe or a city council meeting on plastic bag bans in the city of Albuquerque, 30 minutes at a public hearing is a pretty darn concise situation. And to get a 5-0 PRC ruling on something like this, it implies that there was a wide degree of of unity on the commission, and that they really felt this was pretty cut and dry based on the presentations and the information that they had available to them. So it's worth checking out. It's kind of tricky to find public hearing testimony available on the PRC's website, but you can go to their website and listen in to what happened. We will see how this all shakes out. In Rio Grande Foundation tentatively is at least willing to say that the evidence that this is some kind of anti-business, anti-Facebook plot by the Public Regulation Commission is misguided, at least on its surface at this point. Based on the information we know, it appears that the PRC is standing up for the ratepayers who would otherwise be forced to pay close to $40 million on new infrastructure to take electricity from one side of the state to another for Facebook's primary benefit. And that simply is not the right way to do things. And if Facebook had a concern about this happening, if there was any doubt, Facebook has lots of highly paid attorneys who are supposed to be experts on this kind of thing. You would have expected that they would have had every I crossed and T, or I dotted and T crossed, in order to make sure that this kind of thing did not crop up. So I don't know where somebody made a big boo-boo, though, and hopefully it doesn't cause Facebook to rethink its future here. I mean, they have, unlike, say, the film industry, built massive facility down there in Valencia County, and it's going to be tough for them to just pull all that out, even if it does require them to write a $40 million check to the state of New Mexico.
Well, the other issue about the PRC in New Mexico is it's an elected commission. There is in the statute language that the legislature can guide them, but on a practical day-to-day basis, I've heard utility executives refer to the PRC as it's currently structured as the fourth branch of government in New Mexico, in that they have a lot of authority and a lot of autonomy, and they don't necessarily have to go along with commitments made by governors or legislators, at least in the short term. And so that possibly in the Senate Bill 489, much of the discretion of the PRC was taken away in terms of utility matters. I don't know. I've not heard anything to it, but it's one of those, this may be a pushback of asserting their authority to say that we are going to do that. And so there may be more at play here than just this Facebook and Facebook PNM and PRC issue, but we are definitely in a period of transition with regard to energy policy, and surprising things like this, I think, will become less surprising over time.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that the PRC in New Mexico has had a lot of issues in the past. They've had ethical, people concerned with ethical issues on the PRC, lack of expertise on the PRC, and perhaps something like that will come up and result in a different decision ultimately being made. But based on my listening to that 30 minutes of testimony, it seemed like it was a pretty open and shut case, and the PRC made the decision that's going to protect the ratepayers of the state of New Mexico. Now, a brief note, since we're on electricity, Wally, a few weeks ago, I'd made a bet on social media with the local 350.org. That's one of the radical environmental groups. They're very active on at least Twitter. With the printing of an opinion piece by Representative Larry Scott, largely replicating the statements of the Rio Grande Foundation during the session. Unfortunately, this didn't happen in the printing until just this week, where Representative Scott put his pen to paper and explained why the Energy Transition Act, SB 489, is a bad idea and bad for ratepayers. As I was having that discussion with 350.org, City Councilor Pat Davis decided to jump into the conversation. So I issued the same bet to City Councilor and noted Politico Pat Davis. The 350.org folks have refused to jump on board with my bet. My bet is that if P&M's per kilowatt hour rate is by 2025 less than the rate of inflation, if it goes up by less than the rate of inflation from where it is today to 2025 as the Energy Transition Act is implemented, then I will put statements out on the Rio Grande Foundation social media, whatever, if it's Twitter, Facebook, or the next generation of MySpace, who knows, and say that whoever the other party is in the bet, 350.org, or in this case, City Councilor Pat Davis, I will widely proclaim to mountaintops that they were right. But if electricity rates, and that's P&M's electricity rates, go up by more than the rate of inflation between now and 2025, then that other person will have to put out equivalent statements saying that Rio Grande Foundation is right, that renewable electricity generates a higher cost for ratepayers, et cetera. We'll see if Pat Davis, City Councilor of Albuquerque, takes my bet up or not. The environmental group said no, so we shall see what happens with them. But it's still out there. Anyone who listens to this wants to take up that bet, I am happy to do it.
Well, the silence is deafening, but maybe we'll get lucky.
Perhaps. So, in big political news, before we get on to kind of another interesting area of more data-intensive analysis, Maggie Toulouse Oliver has jumped into the U.S. Senate race against Ben Ray Lujan. Now, Ben Ray Lujan, I don't think we've talked about it on this podcast, but he received Nancy Pelosi's very weighty endorsement, and I think that is ultimately going to drive the discussion in this U.S. Senate race. Ben Ray Lujan has now connections to Washington, has money that he's going to have access to. I personally believe that Maggie Toulouse Oliver, our current Secretary of State, is just keeping her name out there on the top of the stack for future political races. But I suspect she's unlikely to really make this her do or die race. I think this is going to be a experience for her in just kind of learning the ropes of running one of these big, highly leveraged, costly races. But I suspect that she is not seriously going to challenge Ben Ray Lujan in the election for U.S. Senate.
Well, as you said, Nancy Pelosi has given her endorsement early, very early in the process. Ben Ray is the fourth leading Democrat in the House of Representatives who has been doing a ton of fundraising for the entire group of House Democrats nationally for several years now, is probably in a great position to do fundraising. You would have to think that if the money were even, the race could be very close. Maggie Toulouse Oliver have already won a statewide election. Ben Ray only have won an election in the district in northern New Mexico, but I tend to agree with you. I think there's little or no downside for Maggie Toulouse Oliver, and as long as she plays by the rules of not throwing too much mud at Ben Ray during the contest, I think she's probably going to be well served for a future run. Although it's a dangerous thing to lose races. Once you lose a few, there's always exceptions out there amongst the likes of Richard Nixon and others in the political scheme. But once you're playing at the top levels, once you lose a few times, it's very tough to come back. So if she does this will be one in the loss column that she'll have to, in all likelihood, win a subsequent big race, or it may be all over for her political career.
Yeah, no doubt. You don't want to be seen as somebody who loses a lot of races. And, it looks like we fully expect that Ben Ray Lujan is the guy to beat, certainly in the Democratic primary. I don't know if they'll have any other folks join in that side. Certainly Republicans have a candidate, Gavin Clarkson, who's also lost a few races in recent years, but that's kind of more par for the course on the Republican side of the aisle. And I know that they are still working to find a candidate to run for an open seat in the Republican Party for that U.S. Senate race. And boy, it would be a sad statement indeed for the GOP if they can't come up with what at least would qualify as close to a top-tier candidate. There's not many people out there for the Republicans that they have to choose from. Certainly, Governor Martinez, Lieutenant Governor John Sanchez, those are really your main top-tier candidates at this point for the Republicans. And so far, neither of them has so much as dipped their toe into the race, let alone jumped in. And it's going to be interesting to see if anyone in the Republican Party challenges for that seat. And if an open Senate seat goes without a serious Republican challenger, that is an indicator that this state is just marching headlong towards being a totally blue state.
No, without a doubt, Paul. And this is not to belittle any candidate who runs for office in any way, but the term serious implies that you have some name recognition, you have some a bit of a political track record, and also that you can raise money sufficient to be competitive, as opposed to some candidates that, you know, those in the know right off from the get-go because they're not going to raise money. No one ever has heard of them, and there's no way to overcome such overwhelming odds. So I'm with you. An interesting one that has been brought up just out of the blue was the New Mexico Political Journal all but a love letter for Conrad James should run for that. You know, very articulate scientist, former legislator. But, you know, we haven't heard Conrad James politically for many years now. And so the fact that even those that are looking for somebody are having to go so deep to the well doesn't give a good indication that there's going to be a good candidate. We've talked, you know, you have former Governor Martinez, you have Lieutenant Governor Sanchez. You know, I not sure where you go from there that you would qualify as a serious candidate that could possibly defeat the Democrat primary winner.
Well, of course, those who have been involved in New Mexico politics for a few years may remember Conrad James as the state representative who raised the IQ level of the average in any room that he walked into. Very, very sharp guy. African-American. I always said that he looked like a young Billy D. Williams.
Yes.
And, you know, certainly that can appeal to certain demographics. And, you know, he's certainly somebody who I like and respect and would love to see him run as well. But going from, I think he was in the New Mexico House for one cycle, or maybe, no, I think he was in the House, then out of the House, then back in the House, and then he retired again. So essentially a two-term representative making the leap to U.S. Senate. That is a gigantic leap. That's almost bigger than the moon landing kind of leap. So we shall see, but it's going to be a pretty tough search there for the Republican Party. But I did want to make sure folks are aware that they have a competition going on the Democratic side between Ben Ray Lujan and Maggie Toulouse Oliver. And we're still waiting for folks in that House race to jump up. Of course, Ben Ray Lujan's old seat is pretty Democratic stronghold. Bill Redmond once won that for, I believe, just 1-2 year cycle back in the early to mid 90s. But that's a very, very tough seat for Republicans to win. And I'm sure some prominent Democrats will get into that race as time goes by. So last major topic I wanted to bring up here is a United Van Lines annual study. Now, this came out in January, but Wally, in looking at a report, there was a brand new news article that came out on this from Fox Business News. dated Friday, April the 19th, which actually put it on my radar screen. Now, just going through some of the lines. Now, in the past, we've looked at United Van Lines' data. And of course, this is not universal. This is not all-encompassing data. This is people who call up United Van Lines and hire them to move them from state to state. So you're not getting other movers. You're not getting people who move their own stuff by themselves, rent a U-Haul truck, or whatever it may be. This is one company's data. And they used to just kind of put out this information in a press release and maybe throw a map out on the internet. But now, I don't know if they're handing their people who call them and sign the dotted line, say we're moving and we're going to use United Van Lines, but they have primary reason for moving. They have 5 different things listed there. They have the age ranges and the income levels. So all kinds of information. Again, this is available at unitedvanlines.com. And what Fox Business News was looking at specifically was what reason people relocating to specific states gave. So the reason that this came up is because New Mexico was rated highly in terms of retirees. Now, while you and I have talked about retirees and the fact that New Mexico still remains a pretty darn attractive destination if you're not that concerned about the financial aspects of finding a job, if you made your money elsewhere, etc. And indeed, New Mexico is number one in terms of retirement being the number one reason that people choose to move here. It's very distinct as opposed to we're the most attractive destination for retirees. Florida is number 2, Arizona's 3rd, and then it goes on and on and on. But just wanted to throw that out there, Wally. There's a lot more to say about this, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk about the United Van Lines study.
Yeah, well, with the Fox report and then the United Van Lines, it is very interesting. So the categories: retirement, health, family, lifestyle, job, and then I do think, not surprisingly, 42.7% of the people inbound into New Mexico from the United Van Lines were for retirement, although 20%, just under 20, were going to retire and leave the state. But by a 2-to-1 margin, more people are going to retire here than want to leave here. The one that's just the counter to that is the one at the bottom in jobs. Of the people that are leaving, over 54% were leaving to find a job elsewhere, where only 28% were moving here to find a job. And so that puts bookends on that. And then the other health, family, and actually outbound for family was much higher than inbound for family. And a lot of that could be just basically the demographics of New Mexico's a small state. A lot of people have moved here over the years. And as we have aging families, I've known friends and colleagues that as they have retired or had the ability, they moved elsewhere to be with family members. I don't think you can necessarily put that in the face of public policy metric. And then the lifestyle, more people move here for lifestyle than leave, but those are pretty close. So it really comes down to retirement and jobs as being the real big drivers. And I do think it's not unexpected, but boy, it would sure be nicer to see more the inbound and outbound, at least among United Van Lines customers, being a little closer.
Exactly. And just to reiterate again, 2-to-1 margin, people who come to New Mexico are coming here for retirement as opposed to how many are leaving for retirement, which makes sense. Certainly, not many people can say, well, I made all my money in New Mexico, so I'm moving to, whatever other state they would choose to move to retire. But as a job destination, New Mexico is 2-to-1 less of a destination for inbound than outbound people. So people still looking for jobs tending to go elsewhere. Now, I looked up Arizona, and it is one interesting thing about the study as a whole is that New Mexico, there's three different kinds of states in the United Van Lines report. Bluish tinted states are states where people are moving to in greater numbers than they're leaving, top 10. Then there's yellow colored states. Of course, United Van Lines colors are blue and yellow. So yellow are people they're losing people in those states, according to United Van Lines' own statistics. Now, Arizona is one of the top inbound states, and whereas we're at slightly more inbound, like 51% to 49% on the inbound outbound, Arizona is 60% inbound, 40% outbound. In terms of retirement, over 3-to-1 more people are retiring to Arizona than are retiring out of Arizona. So inbound are overwhelmingly coming to Arizona, which Arizona is known as a very big retiree destination. And jobs, Arizona is also, like New Mexico, a less job-oriented destination. So what I'm thinking might be part of what this study is saying is that people who have more money are hiring United Van Lines. I think their data might indicate that they're surveying people, because United Van Lines, they drive around with these big, fancy vans. I know that's not the way I showed up in New Mexico. I'm not sure if I ever leave, we'll be hiring some high-end mover like United Van Lines, but they actually go into the income and age range. And I think there might be some data that skew the whole field towards more reliance on higher income people moving around. Arizona is a pretty attractive destination for people moving, and not to say that people aren't moving out for jobs as well in Arizona. It's an interesting report. It's something that I think is worth checking out. They've got a lot more information available than I would have ever thought that a moving company would care to put out. The Fox Business report on this just came out, as I said, so April 19th. And I think they were looking at a tax day hook on this. Interesting data from one moving company to see. No doubt that New Mexico is skewing towards an aging population over the long term. And again, this is 1 year's worth of data from one moving company. So you got to put a lot of caveats out there. Wallet Hub, it looks pretty darn good by comparison.
When you bring up an excellent point, and I thought of that earlier, and I just want to say that, yeah, you would have to say, and they have some demographics in terms of age and income levels, that if you're using United Van Lines, you almost by definition are going to have to be somewhere close to, if not solidly in the middle class or even higher to be doing that. The times I've moved in my younger days using the U-Haul or the pickup truck or whatever, that is not the sort of people that use United Van Lines. So,
no doubt about it. And the top 10 inbound states: Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona. So pretty heavy concentration in the West, but South Dakota, South Carolina, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Florida, as well as Vermont. Now, Vermont as a top inbound state is perplexing. Outbound, Montana, Kansas, Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Jersey. And I think the outbound states tend to fit in with most of our expectations, with the possible exception of a Montana, maybe a state that is in the West. And, again, 1 year of data is not really enough, especially with one company. You got to have many years of data in actual statistics, broadly speaking, across platforms to understand what's going on. And a lot of entities come up with good studies. The Census Bureau, it just takes a little longer to get their data. New Mexico had been on the leading outbound state list a few years ago, and it's good that people are moving here for whatever reason, in this case, retirement. But ultimately, we need more jobs, more economic prosperity to get New Mexico actually growing in terms of both population and its overall economy.
No doubt about it. And one of the things, like you say, your points are excellent when you look at statistics. The other thing, a state like Vermont has a very low population, although relatively dense. Maybe just the number of Bernie Sanders supporters moving to Vermont to help the campaign could be enough to skew the statistics. New Mexico has a couple million people. Vermont's like in the 600,000. So.
No doubt about it. Yeah. Vermont is 600,000 or so people. And I actually go to Vermont's inbound, outbound metric on the United Van Line. It is a very neat map, and I'm going to embed this at the Errors of Enchantment. They don't even have available data for retirement, health, and family in terms of the outbound. But the number one outbound issue, or the number one outbound metric, is job in Vermont. 85% of the people who move out of Vermont move out for a job. And that's just an indicator right there that Vermont may be attractive as a destination. If you're interested in quaint New England farm, maybe a cow or two, I'm sure it's a lovely place to retire to.
Lovely fall foliage.
But in terms of work opportunities, Vermont, like New Mexico, leaves a lot to be desired. So, folks, that is where we're going to leave it for this week. Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. We're working every day to turn New Mexico around. Go to RioGrandeFoundation.org for more information or to support our work.